She sent a flirty text to the ruthless Mafia boss. Minutes later, he was outside her house. The ache in Avery Cole's feet had long since graduated from a dull throb to a sharp, screaming protest. At 25, she felt ancient. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, and the velvet smoke was finally, mercifully closing. The lounge was a sea of dark wood, low lighting, and the lingering ghosts of expensive cigars and even more expensive cologne. It was the kind of place where men with heavy watches and light morals came to drink. Avery, in her tight black dress and sensible but still painful heels, was part of the decor. "You were wonderful tonight, Avery." "Mister," Henderson slurred, his thick fingers grazing her lower back as he signed the check. He was a weekly regular, a man whose portfolio was as inflated as his ego. "That smile lights up the room." Avery kept her own smile, the one she'd plastered on 8 hours ago, perfectly in place. "Have a safe night, mister." "Henderson, we'll see you next week." He left her a $50 tip on a $400 tab. It was better than nothing, but it wasn't the jackpot she'd been praying for. The high-end clients here left big tips, but they expected a return on their investment. They expected flirtation. They expected the laugh, pitched just high enough, and the way she'd tilt her head when they explained their latest acquisition. They were buying an illusion, and Avery was the one selling it, piece by piece, night after night. She cashed out, the meager wad of bills in her apron feeling heavier than the coins. After tipping out the busboy and the bartender, she was left with just enough to cover the cab ride home and maybe, if she stretched it, the electric bill that was already 2 weeks past due. The cab cut through the polished, quiet streets of the financial district and crossed the river into the bruised, sleeping bulk of Port Elmsworth. The streetlights here were fewer, and many were broken, casting long, skeletal shadows on the pavement. Her building was a 6-story brick walk-up with a radiator that clanged like a warning bell and neighbors who argued loud enough to rattle the windows. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs, her hand automatically going to the small canister of pepper spray on her keychain as she passed a flickering light on the second-floor landing. She unlocked 3 deadbolts before slipping inside. Her movements practiced and quiet. The apartment was cold. She'd kept the heat off to save money, and the chill of the late-night air had seeped through the old window frames. Avery's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a soft, protective warmth. She moved toward the back bedroom, pushing the door open just a crack. "Hey, monkey, I thought you were asleep." Lila was awake, her small, pale face illuminated by the glow of her phone. At 14, Lila was all sharp angles and delicate, bird-like bones. She was propped up on a mountain of pillows, a thin tube running from her nose to a humming oxygen machine in the corner. Lila's heart, the doctor had explained in a voice devoid of optimism, was a degenerative problem, a muscle that was, quite simply, giving up. "I was waiting," Lila whispered, her voice breathy. "Did you have a good night?" "The best," Avery lied, crossing the room to kiss her sister's forehead. It was cool and damp. "Mister, Henderson came in. Tell me my smile lights up the room," Lila giggled, a sound that always ended in a short, tight cough. "He sounds cheesy." "He's 90% cheese, 10% hair gel," Avery agreed, smoothing Lila's thin brown hair. "Now sleep. You have that appointment with Dr. Matthews in the morning. I hate Dr. Matthews. He smells like hand sanitizer and bad news." "Me too. Sleep." Avery waited until Lila's breathing evened out, the soft hiss of the oxygen machine filling the silence. She checked the pill organizer, ensuring the morning doses were set, and then retreated to the kitchen. The kitchen was just a corner of the living room. On the small counter sat a pile of envelopes. Red ink. Final notice. Urgent. Avery felt the familiar, cold panic rise in her throat. Her father, a man who loved poker more than his daughters, had left them with nothing but a mountain of debt when he died of a heart attack 2 years prior. Avery had been paying, or trying to pay, ever since. But Lila's medical bills were a tidal wave, and Avery was drowning. She had worked a double. Her stomach was empty, and the world felt like it was closing in. She needed a release. Just for a second, She remembered the half bottle of champagne a bachelorette party had abandoned at the Velvet Smoke. She'd tucked it into her bag, a small, illegal prize. She pulled it out now, popped the cork with a dull thud, and drank straight from the bottle. It was warm and flat, but the bubbles were sharp, and the buzz was immediate. She sat on her lumpy couch, the champagne bottle resting on her knee. She felt reckless, lonely. The apartment was silent, save for the clanging radiator and the distant sound of a siren. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts she never called, and then she saw the name, Dominic R. She'd saved it 3 months ago. He was a memory that didn't fit with the others. He had come into the Velvet Smoke alone. He wore a suit that was not just expensive, but tailored, sitting on him like a second skin. He didn't flirt, he didn't smile, he just watched her. He'd ordered 1 glass of scotch, paid with a black credit card, and sat in the darkest corner of the lounge for 2 hours. When he'd left, Avery went to clear the glass. Tucked under it was a $1,000 tip. Cash, 10 crisp, $100 bills. She had chased him outside, thinking it was a mistake. "Sir," she'd called out, breathless, "you left this." He had turned. He was taller than she remembered, and the shadows clung to him. He looked at the money in her hand, then back at her face. His eyes were the color of cold, dark coffee. "It wasn't a mistake," he'd said. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that sent a strange shiver down her spine. "But why? I just smiled at you." "That's why," he'd said. He'd handed her a business card. "Dominic R. In case you ever need anything." She had stared at the card. No phone number. Just a name and an embossed logo she didn't recognize, but his number was on her phone. She'd found it in the lounge's reservation system later that night, a private number for a VIP booking, and she had saved it. A fantasy, a what-if. Now, buzzed on flat champagne and desperation, Avery looked at the name. Dominic R., a man who paid $1,000 for a smile. Her fingers moved before her brain could stop them. It was a stupid, reckless, lonely impulse. "Bet you've never been kissed by a broke waitress with nothing to lose." She hit send. The whoosh of the message departing was followed by a sudden, crushing sobriety. "Oh, God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "What did I do?" She fumbled with the phone, trying to unsend it. But it was too late. Delivered, read. She waited for the reply. Who is this? A wrong number, or, more likely, nothing. He was probably asleep in a penthouse, or in bed with a supermodel. He wouldn't even remember her. Her heart was pounding, a frantic bird in her chest. She stood up, pacing the small living room. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Minutes passed. 1, 2, then headlights. Avery froze. The headlights weren't moving past. They sliced through the grime on her window, bright and white, stopping directly in front of her building. She crept to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch. A black car, long and sleek, idled at the curb. It was not a cab. It was not a police car. It looked like a panther, all polished obsidian and quiet menace. The engine, a low thrum she could feel in the floorboards, was the only sound on the street. The driver's door opened. A tall figure stepped out. He was dressed in black. Avery's breath caught. It was him. He didn't look up. He didn't hesitate. He just moved toward the entrance of her building, disappearing from her line of sight. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was here? It wasn't possible. She checked her phone. 4 minutes. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, measured, confident. Not her neighbors. Not the landlord. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was not loud, but it was solid. It vibrated through the cheap wood of her door. Avery stood paralyzed. Lila was asleep. The champagne bottle was on the coffee table. She was in her threadbare pajamas. "Knock, knock, knocky. Who is it?" she called, her voice a weak tremor. "Avery," his voice. The same low, gravelly rumble. He said her name like he owned it. She moved to the door, her hand shaking as she fumbled with the 3 deadbolts. Each one clicked back, a loud, metallic snick in the silence. She opened the door a crack, the security chain still in place. Dominic Romano filled the hallway. He was even taller up close, a solid wall of black wool and imposing presence. The dim, flickering light of the hallway cast shadows across his face, highlighting a strong jaw, a straight nose, and eyes that missed nothing. He was not conventionally handsome. He was something more dangerous. He was compelling. He looked at the chain, then at her eye peeking through the gap. He didn't try to push. He just waited. "You're going to let me in. Avery," he said. It wasn't a question. She fumbled with the chain, her fingers clumsy. The chain slid free. She opened the door. He stepped inside. The tiny apartment seemed to shrink in his presence. He didn't look at the peeling paint or the second-hand furniture. His eyes were fixed on her. "Why?" he asked. "Why what?" she stammered, wrapping her arms around her thin pajamas. "Why did you send the text?" He was close. She could smell his cologne. It was not the cloying sweetness of the velvet smoke. This was dark, something like leather and winter air. "It was a mistake," she whispered, the lie thin and obvious. "I'm so sorry. I was drinking. Leftover champagne. I didn't mean to—" His eyes dropped to the bottle on the table, then back to her face. He saw the stack of red envelopes on the counter. He saw the exhaustion she couldn't hide. He saw the tremor in her hands. "You didn't mean it," he repeated, his voice flat. He took a step closer. She took a step back, hitting the arm of the couch. Yes, I'm sorry to bother you. Mr. Romano." "You're terrified," he observed, his voice softening just a fraction. "But you're not sorry you sent it. You're sorry I'm here." She couldn't answer. He was right. He looked around the small room, his gaze finally landing on the closed door to Lila's room. "You're alone?" he asked. "My sister," she said, her voice sharpening, a sudden flare of protection. "She's sick. Please, don't wake her." His eyes snapped back to hers. He nodded, a sharp, quick gesture. He seemed to have come to a decision. He had not touched her. He had not moved to threaten her. He had just occupied her space. He turned and walked back to the door. Avery let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame, and looked back at her. The intensity of his gaze made her skin prickle. "Next time you send a text like that, Avery," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "be sure you mean it." And he was gone. She heard his footsteps descending the stairs, the front door of the building closing, and the deep, throaty sound of the car engine pulling away. Avery slid the 3 deadbolts back into place, her back pressed against the door, her knees shaking so badly she could barely stand. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. An hour later, just as the sky was beginning to bruise with the first hint of dawn, she heard the crash. It came from downstairs, the splintering of wood, followed by a man's guttural shout. "Petrov, we know you're here, old man." Avery's blood ran cold. She flew to Lila's room. "Lila, wake up! Get in the closet! Now!" Lila, groggy and terrified, scrambled from the bed. Avery pushed her into the small closet. "Don't make a sound, no matter what. Do you understand?" Lila nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Avery shut the door. She grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a cast-iron skillet, and crept back to the living room. She heard them. 2 voices. They were kicking in the landlord's door on the first floor. She heard Mr. Petrov cry out, "Where's the money, old man?" One voice snarled. "I don't have it." "I told you," Petrov pleaded. "Then tell us where the girl is, the one who pays her father's debts. We know she lives here." Avery's stomach turned to ice. They were here for her. She heard a sickening thud. And Mr. Petrov went silent. "She's on 4, the voice said. "Let's go." Heavy boots on the stairs. "Coming up. Fast." Avery backed into the kitchen, the skillet raised, her body trembling so hard she could barely breathe. This was it. The debt collectors. The loan sharks her father had tangled with. They reached her landing. A fist hammered on her door. "Avery Cole, we know you're in there. Open up. You can't hide from us." The door jamb splintered as a heavy boot connected with it. They kicked it again. The wood groaned. One more kick, and they would be in. Avery squeezed her eyes shut. ready to swing. A new sound. A voice from the hallway, calm and cold. "That's far enough!" The kicking stopped. "Who the hell are you?" one of the thugs snarled. Avery didn't hear the reply. She only heard the sound. It was not a firecracker. It was a single deafening crack that echoed in the narrow hallway. So loud it rattled her teeth. A gunshot. One of the men screamed, not in pain, in terror. "Go," Dominic Romano's voice commanded, "and if you ever come back to this building, I will not miss it." Avery heard them scrambling, falling over each other in their haste to get down the stairs. The front door slammed open. Silence. Avery was still pressed against the wall, the skillet shaking in her grip. The door, already broken, was pushed open slowly. Dominic stood in the doorway. He was not breathing hard. He held a handgun at his side, pointed at the floor. His grip casual. He hadn't been gone. He'd been sitting in his car, watching. He looked at her, at the skillet, at the terror in her eyes. The strength that had held her up for years, the adrenaline, the fear, it all evaporated at once. The skillet slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Her knees buckled. He moved faster than she thought possible. He crossed the room in 2 strides, the gun vanishing as he caught her before she hit the ground. She collapsed against him, burying her face in his coat. A raw, animal sob tearing from her throat. He was solid, and he was warm, and he smelled like safety. He held her, one arm securely around her waist, the other hand coming up to rest on the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. "Shh," he murmured. It was the only comfort he offered, but it was enough. After a moment, he simply bent and slid one arm under her knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her to the lumpy couch and set her down gently. Lila, hearing the silence, crept out of the closet, her eyes wide with fear. Dominic looked at the small, frail girl, then back at Avery, who was shaking uncontrollably, wrapped in a sudden, violent chill. He said nothing. He simply removed his own heavy wool overcoat, a garment that probably cost more than the entire apartment, and draped it over Avery's shoulders. It enveloped her, heavy and warm, smelling of him. He walked to the broken door, inspecting the splintered frame with a cold, assessing gaze. He pulled out his phone, typed a short message, and put it away. He looked back at Avery, huddled under his coat, and at Lila, frozen in the bedroom doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were hard as granite. "No one," he said. His voice a low, lethal promise that filled every corner of the small, cold room. "Touches what's mine." Avery woke to silence. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the clanging radiator, not the distant sirens, not the paper-thin walls vibrating with her neighbors' arguments. Just a deep, profound, cotton-soft silence. The second thing she noticed was the light. It was not the thin, gray light of Port Elmsworth that fought its way through her grimy window. This was sunlight, bright and unfiltered, pouring across a carpet so thick and white it looked like fresh snow. She was in bed, but the word felt insufficient. It was a vast expanse of high thread count sheets and a mattress that held her as if she were floating. She was still wearing her threadbare pajamas, but someone had removed Dominic's heavy coat. She sat up, her heart kicking against her ribs. The room was massive, a suite. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, and beyond it, the city was laid out like a map. She could see her neighborhood from here, a smudge of dark brick far below. She was in a penthouse. "Oh, God," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. The memory of the night before crashed down on her, the text, Dominic at her door, the splintering wood, the gunshot. She was overwhelmed and, to her shame, she was grateful. She was safe. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice thin. The man who entered was not Dominic. He was older, with silver hair and a quiet, professional demeanor. He was followed by 2 other men, not in suits but in dark, practical clothing. They were carrying her battered suitcases. "Miss Cole," the older man said, his voice polite. "My name is Vinny. Mr. Romano asked me to see your arrangements. We took the liberty of securing your apartment. Your belongings are here. My sister, Avery said, her voice rising in a panic. "Lila, I have to get her. Where is she?" "She is on her way," Vinny said, as if anticipating the question. "Along with her medical equipment. Mr. Romano has also arranged for a consultation." "A consultation? Her appointment is with Dr. Matthews this morning." "Her appointment with Dr. Matthews has been canceled," Vinny stated simply. "Dr. Aris, a pediatric cardiologist from Johns Hopkins, is flying in to see her this afternoon. He will be meeting you both here." Avery stared at him. A doctor from Johns Hopkins, flying in. The sheer, casual display of power was staggering. "Where is he?" Avery asked, her voice small. "Dominic." "Mr. Romano is handling the disruption from last night," Vinny said, his choice of words precise. "He will be here this evening." Before Avery could process, there was another knock. Lila was wheeled in by another man, her eyes wide as she took in the suite. Her oxygen tank and machine were set up in a corner before Avery could even stand. "Aves," Lila breathed, looking at the view. "Are we in heaven?" "Something like that." "Monkey," Avery said, rushing to her side, her gratitude warring with a terrible, creeping fear. All of this had a price. Later that afternoon, after the shockingly kind doctor, Aris had spent 2 hours with Lila, changing her medication and speaking with a quiet confidence that gave Avery a fragile, unfamiliar feeling of hope. Vinny returned. "I have some information for you, Miss Cole," he said. Standing in the living area of the suite, Lila was in the second bedroom, asleep. "What information?" "The men who broke into your apartment," he said, his face unreadable. "They were not simple debt collectors. They were enforcers." "Enforcers for who?" "A rival organization," Vinny said. "The Giordano cartel." The name meant nothing to Avery, but the word cartel landed in her stomach like a stone. "Mr. Romano's rivals," Vinny clarified. The fragile hope in Avery's chest turned to ice. She stood up, her fists clenched. "So that's what this is, Miss Cole. He's using me, isn't he? Those men came for me, and he used it as an excuse to what? Start a war? Put me in this gilded cage so they'd come for me again? Mr. Romano did not know about your situation, or the men who were after you, until he arrived at your building," Vinny said, his voice firm, unwavering. His presence there was unrelated. The rest was a confluence of unfortunate events. "Unfortunate," Avery repeated, the word tasting like ash. You tell him I am not a pawn in his game." "I will relay your sentiments," Vinny said, bowing his head slightly. "Dinner will be served at 7. Please let the concierge know if you or your sister require anything." He left. Avery paced the room. A furious, trapped animal. She was grateful. Yes, but she was also bait, and she was terrified of what, exactly, was hunting. Dominic arrived at 8. She heard the door open and close, a soft, solid click. She was standing by the window, watching the city lights blur. She didn't turn. "You should eat," he said, his voice, that low gravel rumble, filled the space. "I'm not hungry," she snapped, turning to face him. "And I'm not your prisoner." He was closer than she expected. He had taken off his jacket. He was just in a black button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up his forearms. She could see the dark lines of a tattoo peeking out from his left cuff. "You're not my prisoner," he agreed, his voice calm. "You're my guest. Your guest, the one you used to escalate a gang war, the Giordano cartel. Vinny called it." His expression didn't change, but his eyes, those dark coffee-colored eyes, sharpened. "Vinny is thorough. He's also correct. I didn't know who you were. Avery. Not really. I didn't know what trouble you were in. I just knew you sent me a text. And that was enough for you to come to my apartment? To just wait outside? I was intrigued," he said, taking a step closer. "And when I left, I was still intrigued. So I waited. It's a habit." He stopped in front of her. He was so tall. He blocked the view. "I don't let harm come to women under my care." "I'm not under your care," she said, but her voice wavered. He didn't reply. His gaze dropped, not to her face, but to her arm. He gently took her hand. She hadn't even noticed the bruise, a dark, ugly mark on her wrist, left by one of the men as he'd tried to kick in the door, and she'd fallen back. Dominic's thumb traced the edge of the bruise, a touch so light it was barely there, but it sent a jolt through her entire body. "He touched you," he stated, his voice a low, cold whisper. "It's nothing," she said, trying to pull her hand back. His grip tightened, not painfully, but with absolute possession. He lifted her wrist, his eyes never leaving the bruise, as if he were memorizing it. The silence in the room was thick, charged with unspoken things. All her anger, her fear was still there, but now it was tangled with something else, this overwhelming, dangerous attraction. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was the gratitude. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was the reckless, lonely girl who'd sent the text in the first place. She leaned in and kissed him. It was slow, hesitant, her lips were dry, and she had no idea what she was doing. It was a question, what are you? For a second, he remained perfectly still, a statue. She started to pull back, mortified, but his hand moved, sliding from her wrist to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He didn't pull her. He just held her, and then he kissed her back. I was not hesitant. It was not slow. It was a claim. His lips were firm, and they moved with a practiced, devastating control. He didn't force her mouth open. He commanded it. He deepened the kiss, one hand still gripping her wrist, the other anchoring her to him. Her knees became weak, just as they had in her apartment, but this time it wasn't from fear. A small sound, a half-groan, half-sigh, escaped her. His hand on her neck moved, his other arm snaking around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. He broke the kiss, his lips moving to her jaw, her ear, down the column of her throat. She gasped, her head falling back, her hands finding his shoulders, his biceps. He had solid muscles. He guided her backward, never breaking contact, until her legs hit the back of the couch. She fell onto the cushions, and he followed, half covering her, one knee on the couch between her legs. His mouth found hers again, and this time it was hungry. Her hands were in his hair, on his shirt, fumbling with the buttons. His hand was on her leg, sliding up her thigh, his touch scorching her skin even through the fabric of her pajamas. It was too much. It was too fast. It was all she wanted. Then he stopped. He just stopped. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his breath short. His eyes were dark, almost black, with a fire she'd never seen. He stared down at her flushed skin and swollen lips, at her half-undone pajamas. He pushed himself off her, standing up and turning his back, running a hand through his dark hair. "Dominic?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Go to bed, Avery," he said, his voice rough. "What's wrong?" He turned to face her. The fire was gone, banked, replaced by that cold, controlled mask. "You deserve better," he said, his voice flat, "than being someone's escape." He grabbed his jacket from the chair and walked to the door. "Wait," she called out. "What does that mean? What are you escaping?" He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "You should ask about your father." And he was gone, leaving her alone, aching and more confused than ever. The next 2 days were a blur. Dominic did not return, but his presence was everywhere. Food appeared, mountains of it. Clothes, too. Shopping bags from stores she couldn't even afford to window shop at, all in her size. Lila was treated like a princess, with video games and art supplies. Vinny had given her a new phone and a debit card with an unlimited balance for incidentals. Avery ignored it. She felt trapped. She learned from Vinny that her father had owed tens of thousands of dollars to Giordano's enforcers, a gambling debt that had, upon his death, transferred to her. On the 3rd day, she couldn't take it anymore. She had to do something normal. She had to breathe air that wasn't filtered by a penthouse HVAC system. She told Lila she was going to the corner store, a small bodega attached to the hotel complex, to get her favorite brand of ginger ale. She slipped out, past the 2 men stationed discreetly in the hallway, who only nodded at her. She felt their eyes on her back. The bodega was bright, clean and blessedly normal. She grabbed the soda, paid in cash from her own wallet, and stepped back out. She didn't take the elevator. She took a side exit into an alley just for a second to feel the cold, damp air of the city. Pretty girl. Avery froze. A man stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking her way. He was not one of Dominic's men. He was thin, with greasy hair and a mean, pinched face. Lost, are you? That's a long way from your tower. I don't know what you mean, Avery said, backing up. Don't you? He smiled, showing yellowed teeth. You're Dominic's new girl, the one he's keeping, but you still belong to us. Your father's debt. He took a step. Avery's back hit the brick wall. Giordano's very interested in you. He slithered, pulling a small, dirty knife from his pocket. He wants to meet you. He wants me to bring him a piece, just to show I found you. He reached out, grabbing a lock of her hair. Stop, Avery screamed, batting at his hand. Or maybe, he whispered, his foul breath washing over her, I'll just mark up that pretty face. He never finished the sentence. There was a sound, a blur of motion, and the man was gone from in front of her. Dominic had him slammed against the opposite wall of the alley, one hand around his throat, lifting him off his feet. The man's knife clattered to the pavement. You put your hands on her! Dominic's voice was not a voice. It was a low, terrifying growl. I didn't, the man wheezed, his feet kicking. Dominic looked at Avery, who was pressed against the wall, shaking, the ginger ale bottle shattered at her feet. Are you hurt? He demanded. Avery shook her head, unable to speak. Dominic turned back to the man. You threatened her. There was a sickening crack, not a gunshot, a bone. The man screamed, a high-pitched, gurgling sound. Dominic hit him. 1, 2, 3. Hard, precise, brutal punches to the gut and ribs. The man crumpled. You tell Giordano, Dominic whispered, pressing the man's face into the grimy brick, that she is mine, and if he, or any of his men, ever breathe in her direction again, I will burn his entire family to the ground, starting with you. He dropped the man, who collapsed in a heap, sobbing and clutching his clearly broken arm. Dominic turned to Avery. He was breathing hard, but he was in control. He walked over to her, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't speak. He just looked at her wild eyes and her trembling form. He reached out, not to hold her, but to brace his hands on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. Avery started to cry, not from fear of him, but from the adrenaline, the relief, the terror of what her life had become. I just wanted ginger ale, she sobbed. His expression softened. The cold fury melted, replaced by something she couldn't name. It looked painful. He lowered his forehead until it rested against hers. She could feel his breath, smell the winter air on his skin. I'm sorry, Avery, he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she didn't understand. I'm so sorry. She looked up, her tears blurring his face. His eyes were closed, his dark lashes were stark against his skin. I'm so scared, she whispered. I know, he said, and he kissed her. There was no hesitation this time. It was not a question, and it was not a claim. It was a collision. It was heat and longing and a raw, desperate need. His lips were on hers, and it was not gentle. It was a kiss that said he had been holding back, and he couldn't hold back anymore. Her hands came up, not to push him away, but to grip the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. This was not a slow burn. This was an inferno. He kissed her like he was drowning, and she was his only air. He kissed her like he would burn the world down for her. And in that alley, surrounded by the wreckage of her old life, she knew, with terrifying certainty, that he would... Avery lasted exactly 2 days in the gilded cage of the penthouse before the silence began to scream. The luxury was suffocating. Every time she sank into the plush carpet or drank water that didn't taste like rusty pipes, she felt a phantom debt accruing. Dominic had said she wasn't a prisoner, yet there were men in the hall, men in the lobby, and a driver who waited by the curb like a sleek, black sentinel. She needed to work. She needed to feel the weight of a tray in her hand and the ache in her feet, sensations that belonged to her real life, not this dreamscape Dominic had constructed. "I'm going to work," she told Vinny on Thursday afternoon. Vinny looked up from his tablet, his eyebrows raising a fraction of an inch. "Mr. Romano would advise against that." "Mr. Romano isn't here," Avery said, pulling on her coat. It was the old one, not the cashmere one Dominic had left for her. "And I have shifts to cover. If I lose this job, I will lose my only lifeline if this ends." She didn't wait for permission. She took the elevator down, ignored the driver, and hailed a yellow cab before the security detail could stop her. The velvet smoke was busy for a Thursday. The familiarity of the noise, the clinking glass, the low murmur of conversation, the jazz piping through the speakers, settled her nerves. For 6 hours, she was just Avery. She poured drinks, she dodged wandering hands, she faked smiles. It was exhausting, and it was perfect. But when she clocked out at 2 a.m, the air outside felt different. The shadows on the street seemed longer, sharper. She began the walk to the subway, her heels clicking on the pavement, a block away from the club. She heard it, tires rolling slow, too slow. She glanced over her shoulder. A black SUV, windows tinted to an impenetrable obsidian, was creeping along the curb, matching her pace. It wasn't Dominic's car. It was older, bulkier, and missing the front license plate. Avery's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She sped up. The car sped up. She turned the corner, aiming for the brightly lit bodega halfway down the block. The engine behind her roared, the SUV mounting the curb to cut her off. Avery gasped, stumbling back as the passenger door flew open. A man in a ski mask reached out, his gloved hand grasping for her coat. "Get in!" he barked. Before she could scream, before she could run. Headlights flooded the alley from the opposite direction. A sedan screeched to a halt, boxing the SUV in. 3 men poured out of the sedan before it had even fully stopped. It was chaos. Metal crunched against metal. There was shouting, the distinct, terrifying sound of a pistol being racked. The man in the SUV cursed, slammed his door, and the driver threw the vehicle into reverse, tires smoking as they scraped against the brick wall to escape. Strong hands grabbed Avery's shoulders. She thrashed, swinging her purse, striking a solid chest. "Miss Cole, it's us!" She froze. It was one of the men from the hotel hallway. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Get in the car," he urged, not unkindly, but with zero room for argument. "Now." The ride back was a blur of adrenaline and nausea. They didn't go to the hotel. They drove out of the city, winding up a long, private drive to a massive estate that loomed against the night sky like a fortress. They brought her into a library that smelled of old paper and burning wood. Dominic was there. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in dark slacks and a white shirt that was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair messy as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. When he saw her, the relief on his face existed for exactly 1 second before it was incinerated by a fury so hot she could feel it from across the room. "Leave us," he ordered the men. The door clicked shut. "Are you insane?" His voice was not loud. It was a low, vibrating thing that shook the floorboards. He crossed the room, stopping inches from her. He looked like he wanted to shake her, or maybe pull her into his chest. He did neither. He kept his hands clenched at his sides. "I went to work," Avery said, her voice trembling but her chin high. "I have a job. Dominic, I have a life. You have a target on your back," he roared, the control finally snapping. "You don't get to play normal when men are hunting you. Avery, do you understand what just happened? Do you understand how close they came to taking you?" "I didn't ask for this," she shouted back, the fear from the alley transforming into anger. "I didn't ask for your protection, and I didn't ask for your enemies. I am trying to pay my rent. I'm trying to keep my sister alive. And you think serving scotch to businessmen is going to save her?" He stepped into her space, his towering frame eclipsing the light. "You think $50 in tips is going to stop Giordano? It's honest money," she hissed. "I won't be a kept woman. Dominic, I won't just sit in your tower and wait for you to come home. It's not about keeping you," he said, his voice dropping, the anger bleeding out to reveal a jagged, raw desperation. It's about keeping you alive." He ran a hand down his face, exhaling a breath that sounded like a growl. "Stay here, at the estate. Permanently. Bring Lila. There are 12 bedrooms. There is security that rivals the White House. You never have to step foot on a street alone again." "No," Avery said. Dominic stared at her, stunned. "No? I can't just live off you. I can't be whatever this is. I have pride. Dominic, it's the only thing I have left." They stared at each other, a stalemate of stubbornness and fear. Before Dominic could respond, before he could tear down her defenses, Vinny knocked on the door. "Boss," Vinny said, stepping in his grave, "it's the hotel. The nurse just called." Avery's blood turned to ice water. "Lila." The drive to the hotel took 20 minutes. The ambulance ride to the hospital took 10. Lila had collapsed. Her lips were blue, her small chest heaving as she fought for air that simply wouldn't come. The degenerative condition was accelerating. The doctor at the public emergency room was overwhelmed, shouting orders, but nothing was moving fast enough. Avery stood in the hallway, pressed against the wall, watching them work on her sister. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets. She felt small. She felt powerless. The pride she had clung to in Dominic's library felt like dust in her hands. She couldn't pay for this. She couldn't save her. She felt a hand on her shoulder, heavy, warm. "Vinny," Dominic said, not looking away from Lila's pale form through the glass. "Call St. Jude's. Tell them we need the East Wing. Tell Dr. Aris to meet us there. Now." "Dominic," Avery whispered, "I can't." "She needs a bypass," Dominic said, his voice devoid of emotion, pure calculation. "And she needs the specialist. We aren't waiting here." He made 3 phone calls and within 15 minutes, a private transport team arrived. They bypassed the chaotic ER intake. They moved with the efficiency of a military unit. 2 hours later, Lila was stabilized in a private room that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital. Dr. Aris, the specialist Dominic had flown in days ago, came out of the room, pulling off his surgical cap. "She's stable." "Doctor," Aris said, "the episode was severe, but we caught it. I'm scheduling the surgery for Tuesday. We're going to fix the valve." "The cost," Avery choked out. "I don't have insurance that covers—" "It's taken care of," Dominic said. He was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot. "Paid in full, up front, Doctor." Aris nodded and walked away. Avery looked at Dominic. He was exhausted. His shoulders, usually so square, were slumped. He had spent the entire night warring with bureaucracy, using his name, his money, his power, just to make sure a 14-year-old girl could breathe. The dam inside Avery broke. She crossed the room and buried her face in his chest. "Thank you," she sobbed, her hands gripping his shirt. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He stood stiffly for a moment, as if surprised by the contact, and then his arms came around her. He held her tight, crushing her to him, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I told you," he murmured into her hair. "No one touches what's mine, not even death." They didn't go back to the hotel. They went to the estate. It was safer. He said. She didn't argue. She didn't have the fight left in her. The master bedroom was vast, dark, and quiet. Avery had showered, washing off the smell of the hospital, and was sitting on the edge of the massive bed in one of Dominic's t-shirts. He came out of the bathroom, wearing only pajama pants. His chest was broad, scarred in places, a map of violence she didn't want to read. He saw her sitting there, looking lost. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, pulled back the duvet, and got in. He held his arm out. She crawled into the space beside him, fitting her body against his side. He pulled the covers up over them. "Sleep. Avery," he whispered. "I've got you." She lay there, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was a strong, slow rhythm. It was the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. She lifted her head. He was watching her in the dark, his eyes reflecting the moonlight filtering through the curtains. The anger from earlier was gone. The coldness was gone. There was only a raw, unguarded need. She reached up and touched his jaw. His skin was rough with stubble. "You saved her," she whispered. "I would do it again," he said. 1,000 times. The air in the room shifted. It grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. The gratitude in her chest was swirling into something hotter, something deeper. She didn't want to be alone. She didn't want to be safe. She wanted to be close. She leaned up and kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss in the alley. That had been desperate. A reaction to fear. This was deliberate. Dominic went still, his breath hitching. He tried to pull back, his hand gripping her hip to stop her. Avery, you're vulnerable. You're emotional. I won't take advantage of that. I'm not asking you to take advantage, she murmured against his lips. I'm asking you to make me feel alive. His resolve shattered. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and flipped them over. He pinned her gently against the mattress, his weight pressing her down, shielding her from the world. He kissed her jaw, the sensitive spot behind her ear, the column of her throat. His hands were everywhere in her hair, tangling in the oversized shirt, skimming her waist. Dominic, she breathed, arching into him. He pulled back to look at her. His eyes were dark pools of desire. Tell me to stop. Tell me now. Avery, don't stop, she said. Please, don't stop. He kissed her then, a searing, passionate claim. He lifted her, moving them until her back was pressed against the heavy oak door of the bedroom, kneading the solidity, the friction. His hands found the hem of the shirt and lifted it. The clothes fell away slowly. There was no rush. Every touch was deliberate, a reverence. He traced the curve of her hip, the line of her spine, treating her body like it was something precious and breakable, even as his kisses grew hungrier. When skin finally met skin, the sensation was blinding. It was intense, a fever breaking. It was tender, full of unspoken fears and a desire that had been simmering since that first text message. He made love to her with a focus that bordered on worship. He watched her face, tracking every emotion, every gasp. It was an exorcism of the fear they had both lived with for days, for an hour. There were no cartels, no debts, no sickness. There was just the heat of him, the weight of him, and the promise in his touch. Afterward, the silence returned. Avery lay on her back, staring at the high ceiling. The moonlight cast long, pale bars across the sheets. Dominic was lying beside her, one arm thrown over his eyes, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a cold clarity in its wake. She looked at the man beside her, the Mafia boss, the killer, the savior. She had given him her body. She had let him save her sister. She was living in his house. Panic, cold and sharp, began to creep in. She was in so deep she couldn't see the surface anymore. She had fallen for a man who lived in a world of violence, a man whose enemies tried to kidnap her off the street. Dominic shifted, turning his head to look at her. He didn't reach out. He just watched her. His eyes were soft, a vulnerability there that she had never seen. But beneath the softness, there was guilt, heavy, dark guilt. "You're thinking about running," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about how I can possibly stay," she admitted, her voice whispering in the dark. He didn't argue. He didn't offer promises he couldn't keep. He just turned away, staring at the wall, the distance between them on the bed feeling like a canyon. The morning sun was blinding. It hit the white sheets, exposing everything. Avery woke to the sound of a door closing. She was alone in the bed. She dressed quickly, finding her clothes folded on a chair. She walked down the grand staircase, the house silent as a tomb. She found Dominic in his study. He was standing behind his desk, fully dressed in a black suit, his back to the door. Vinny and two other capos were standing in front of him. The atmosphere in the room was thick enough to choke on. "What is it?" Avery asked from the doorway. The men turned. Vinny looked at Dominic. Dominic turned slowly. His face was stone. The softness from the night before had been locked away in a vault, buried deep. "Go back upstairs, Avery," he said. "Tell me," she demanded, stepping into the room. "If I'm staying here, if I'm with you, tell me." Dominic picked up a piece of paper from his desk. It was a photograph. He didn't show it to her, he just held it. "They left a message," Dominic said, his voice devoid of inflection. At the Velvet Smoke, early this morning, the cleaning crew found it. A message? A body, Vinny clarified quietly. One of our doormen. With a note pinned to his chest? Avery covered her mouth, nausea rolling in her stomach. Oh my God! It was a warning, Dominic said, for me, to stop protecting you. He slammed the photo down on the desk. The sound cracked like a gunshot. I am done with warnings, he said. I am done playing defense. He looked at Avery. Pack a bag, a small one. What? I'm sending you away, he said. Texas. I have a safe house outside of Austin. You and Lila, the plane leaves in 2 hours. No, Avery said, shaking her head. It is not a request, Dominic shouted, his hands slamming onto the desk. This is war. Avery. Real war. Not threats, not broken doors. People are going to die. I cannot fight them if I am worried about you every second of every day. So you're just going to ship me off? She shouted back, crossing the room to stand on the other side of the desk. You're going to send me away while you stay here and what, kill people, die? If that's what it takes, he said coldly. Well, I'm not going, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm not leaving you to do this alone. You said no one touches what's yours. You said I was yours. Avery? No. She slammed her hand down on the desk, right next to his. I am not running away again. If you send me to Texas, I will walk back. I am staying, whether you like it or not. Dominic stared at her. His chest was heaving. He looked at her like he wanted to scream, like he wanted to kiss her, like he wanted to lock her in a tower and throw away the key. You are a fool, he whispered, but the anger was cracking. Maybe, she said, but I'm your fool. He closed his eyes, exhaling a long, shaky breath. He knew, in that moment, that he had lost this battle, and because he had lost it, the war that was coming would be bloodier than anything Port Elmsworth had ever seen. Fine, he said, opening his eyes. They were hard, terrifyingly focused. You stay, but from this moment on, you do exactly what I say. No questions, no arguments. Avery nodded. Okay. Dominic looked at Vinny. Call the boys. Call everyone. We're going to burn the Giordano's down. Dominic's study was no longer a library. It was a war room. Avery stood in the hallway, her hand on the heavy oak door, listening. She'd been on her way to find him, to just sit in the same room, to feel the solid presence that had become her only anchor, but the voices on the other side stopped her cold. Giordano crossed a line. Dominic's voice was flat, sharp, and deadly. The body at the Velvet Smoke was not just a message, it was a declaration. He's sloppy, and he's arrogant. He thinks because he controls the ports, he controls the city. We are going to remind him that the city's blood runs on the streets, and we control the streets. The air in the study was thick with cigar smoke and testosterone. She could picture him, standing behind his desk, a general addressing his soldiers. Vinny, you take the ports, Dominic continued. I want every shipment he has, coming in or going out, locked down, squeeze him. I want him to feel this in his bank account by morning. Understood, boss, Vinny's voice replied, respectful and immediate. Another voice, one she didn't know, rougher, like gravel in a blender, chimed in. And the girl, boss, Giordano's not going to stop. He's obsessed. He knows she's your weakness. She is not a weakness, Dominic stated, his voice dropping to a growl. She is my purpose. You will all treat her as such. Of course. Boss, of course, the gravelly voice said quickly. I just mean her old man. Are we sure she's clean? Giordano had her father on his payroll for 6 months before he died. Cole was singing to him. That's how he racked up the debt in the first place, in Giordano's own card games. It's dirty. The world stopped. Avery's blood turned to ice, then to fire, singing to him on his payroll. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of her own mind, her father, the man who abandoned them, the man who left them with nothing but debt. It wasn't just gambling. It was a betrayal. He was an informant. She pushed the door open. The study fell into a profound silence. 4 men, Dominic, Vinny, and 2 other capos she'd never seen, all turned to look at her. The man with the gravelly voice had a look of pure panic on his face. Avery's eyes were locked on Dominic. His face was a mask of cold, hard stone. He had not wanted her to hear this. "Get out," Dominic said to the men, his eyes never leaving Avery's. "All of you, now." They practically ran from the room, Vinny giving her a look of deep, profound pity as he passed. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the cloud of smoke. "Avery," he started. "Don't," she said, her voice a low, shaking whisper. She held up a hand. "Don't you dare!" She walked toward the desk. Each step an effort. She felt hollow, like her insides had been scooped out. "My father," she said, her voice breaking. "He was an informant. He was working for Giordano." It wasn't a question. It was a damnation. Dominic did not move. He did not deny it. He just watched her, his face grim. "You knew," she whispered, the realization sucking the air from her lungs. "When you came to my apartment that first night, you knew. When you saved me from those men, you knew who they were and why they were there. It wasn't just debt. It was his betrayal." The pieces were clicking into place, each one a shard of glass in her heart. "All this time," she said, her voice rising to a hysterical tone. "You knew. You let me believe I was just some waitress. You let me believe you were protecting me from loan sharks." She slammed her hands on his desk. "Scattering papers. Was this ever real? Or was I just a piece of his debt? Was I leveraged? Was I just some stray thing you picked up because you knew my father was a traitor and you wanted something to hold over Giordano?" His face, which had been pure stone, cracked. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "It does not matter what your father was," he said, his voice low. "It doesn't matter," she shrieked, laughing a broken, terrible sound. "It's the only thing that matters. It's the reason my sister is sick. It's the reason my life is in ruins. It's the reason they are hunting me. It's the reason you are in my life. Did you know? From the very beginning, that night at the Velvet Smoke. Did you know who I was?" He watched her, the seconds stretching, his silence a screaming confession. "I knew what he was," Dominic said finally, his voice raw, "and I chose you anyway." That was the line. That was the thing that broke her. "I chose you anyway." It was not an absolution. It was an admission of his power, of his choice. He had seen her, a broken thing from a traitor's family, and he had chosen her, like a stray, like a prize. She slapped him. The sound cracked through the study, loud as a gunshot. Her palm stung, her whole arm vibrating with the impact. Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just turned his head back to face her, the red mark bright on his cheek. "Avery," he said, his voice a warning. She ran. She didn't know where she was going. She just ran. Down the hall, past a stunned guard, down the grand staircase. She saw a polished wooden bowl on a table by the front door. Keys. She grabbed a set, burst through the front doors, and ignored the shouts of the men on the perimeter. She found the car that matched the key fob, a massive black Range Rover, and threw herself inside. She jammed the key, hit the ignition, and slammed the car into drive, peeling out of the long, winding driveway, her tears finally breaking free. She drove, her vision blurred, her hands shaking on the wheel. She drove back to the city, back to the river, back to the one place on earth that was, undeniably, hers. She left the Range Rover running at the curb, a beacon of wealth in the gritty, gray landscape of Port Emsworth. The door to her apartment building was still broken. The cheap plywood someone had nailed over her apartment door was flimsy. She kicked it, and it splintered, the wood giving way easily. The apartment was cold, and it smelled of fear. It was exactly as she had left it, the overturned lamp, the shattered fragments of a vase. It was a tomb. She stumbled to her bedroom, pulling an old duffel bag from the closet. She was sobbing now. Great, heaving, gut-wrenching sobs. She threw in clothes, random, useless things, an old sweatshirt, a pair of worn-out sneakers, the pill bottles from Lila's nightstand. She was trapped. She had no money, no home. Her sister was in a hospital wing paid for by the man who had lied to her. Her father was a traitor. She sank to the floor, her back against the bed, the duffel bag in her lap. She was hyperventilating. She remembered the old, cracked phone she kept in her drawer for emergencies. She pulled it out. The battery was at 3%. She scrolled to the one number she could call. Sarah, her friend from the Velvet Smoke. The phone rang twice. Aves, what's wrong? You're not on the schedule, Sarah's voice said, sleepy and concerned. Sarah, Avery choked out, I need help. I need money. For a bus ticket. For me and Lila. I'm at my apartment. Please, can you come? Avery, you sound awful. What's going on? That guy, that rich guy. He lied to me, Sarah. He lied about everything. I just have to get out. Please. Okay, I'm coming, Sarah said, her voice sharp with alarm. I've got 200 in my cookie jar. I'm on my way. Don't move. Avery hung up, her body shaking with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold apartment. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth, the sound of her own sobs filling the dusty air. A shadow fell over her. She looked up. Dominic was standing in the bedroom doorway. He filled it. His suit was immaculate, his face unreadable, but the red mark on his cheek was darker now. He was breathing hard, as if he had run up the 4 flights of stairs. You should not be here, he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated with barely contained fury. Get out, she screamed, her voice cracking. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the nearest thing, a heavy glass perfume bottle, and throwing it at him. He dodged it easily. It shattered against the wall behind him. You're coming with me, he said, taking a step into the room. No! She shrieked. I am done. I'm done with you. I'm done with your war. I'm done with your lies. She flew at him, hammering on his chest with her fists, a wild, desperate, powerless assault. I am done, she sobbed. I never asked for any of this. I never asked for you to save me. I was fine. I was surviving. I was paying my bills. And you knew. You knew what my father was, and you used me. He grabbed her, his hands closing on her upper arms, and shook her. Once. Hard. You were fine? He roared, his controls snapping, his voice echoing in the small, dead apartment. You were fine. You were 4 minutes from being taken by Giordano's men in your hallway. You were 1 block from being dragged into a van. You call that fine? He was shouting, his face inches from hers, his fury a tangible, scorching heat. I never asked for it, she cried, her strength gone, her body collapsing as her legs gave out. He caught her, his hand moving to her wrist, yanking her upright. His grip was iron. It was unthinking, possessive, and it hurt. Avery winced, a small, terrified sound, her eyes flying to his hand, then to his face. Dominic froze. He looked down at his own hand, at the white-knuckled grip on her slender wrist. He saw the red marks his fingers were making. He saw her face, the raw, animal terror in her eyes. It was the same look she'd had when the thugs were at her door. He'd put it there. He let go of her as if she were on fire. He stumbled back, his face ashen, his self-loathing a visible, toxic thing. I'll never be like the men who hurt you, he whispered, his voice raw, broken. He looked at his own hand, disgusted. But I'm not a good man. Avery, I'm not... That broke her. The last wall, the last defense. She didn't see the monster. She saw the man, trapped in the cage of his own life, his own violence. She fell into him. She didn't just collapse into his arms, she launched herself at him, her arms locking around his neck, her face burying in his chest. Her sobs were muffled against his suit. Don't leave me, she whispered, her voice choked. Please, Dominic, don't let me go. I can't do this alone. He was still for a second, stunned, and then his arms came around her, crushing her to him. He held her as if he could absorb her pain, as if he could shield her from the world, from himself, from the truth of her father. He buried his face in her hair, and his whole body shuddered. She tilted her head back, her face wet with tears. She looked at the red mark on his cheek, the mark she had made, and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a collision. It was salt and fury and desperation. It was a kiss that said, I hate you and I need you in the same breath. It was explosive. A fire lit by the primal fear of what they had just almost lost. He kissed her back, his mouth taking hers with a desperate, claiming hunger. His hands tangled in her hair, gripping her head, holding her steady as he poured all of his rage, his guilt, and his terrifying, possessive love into her. At that same moment, across town, in a damp concrete basement, Giordano stubbed out a cigarette on the floor. He was a man in an $8,000 suit, and he looked perfectly at home. "Tell me," he said, his voice calm, almost bored, "where he keeps his heart." Dominic's lieutenant, the man who had been with Vinny in the study, was hanging from a chain. He was bloody, his face a ruin, but he hadn't spoken. "Every man has a soft spot," Giordano mused, lighting another. "His money? No, he has too much. His reputation? He doesn't care." Or, Giordano stepped closer, blowing smoke into the man's broken face. "Is it a girl? A little broke waitress from Port Elmsworth?" The lieutenant's eyes flickered. Just for a second, Giordano smiled. There it is. The pressure tightens. The passion in the ruined apartment cooled, leaving a grim, cold reality. Dominic's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his arm still locked around Avery's waist. He read the text. His face went white. "They have Marco," he said, his voice flat. "They're torturing him. They're looking for you." He was moving. All business, all cold, lethal focus. He pulled her with him. "You're right," he said. I lied by not telling you. But we are done running." He didn't send her to Texas. He couldn't have her that far away. Not now. He took her back to the hospital. He signed Lila out against medical advice with Dr. Aras supervising. They moved in a convoy of 3 black cars. They drove 2 hours north, deep into the woods, to a house that was not a house. It was a fortress of glass and steel and stone, built into the side of a mountain, invisible from the road. Guards were everywhere, in the trees, on the roof, at the gate. "You and Lila will stay here," he said, leading them inside. "No one, and I mean no one, knows this place exists. Not Giordano, not even all of my own men." That night, Avery tucked Lila into a new bed in a room with a window that looked out onto nothing but dark, silent woods. Lila was pale from the journey, but her breathing was steadier, stronger. "Aves?" Lila asked, her voice small in the big, quiet room. "Yeah, Monkey? Do you love him? Dominic?" Avery looked out the window. She saw the faint outline of a guard on the balcony below, his rifle glinting in the moonlight. She felt terrified. She felt safer than she had ever been in her entire life. She turned back to her sister, a small, sad smile on her face. "I'm so scared, Lila," she admitted. "But yes, I think I do." The silence of the safe house in the woods was a living thing. It was thick and heavy, pressing in on Avery from all sides, broken only by the hum of Lila's new oxygen machine and the quiet, measured footsteps of the guards patrolling the perimeter. Dominic had been gone for 5 days. He had left them with a team of 6 men, a fully stocked kitchen, and a satellite television, but no way to call out. He had called Avery every night. Then, 2 nights ago, the calls had stopped. She was sitting in the massive, sterile living room, watching the news on mute, when a breaking report flashed across the screen. She fumbled for the remote, turning the volume up. "Port Elmsworth is in an uproar this morning," the newscaster said, her face grim. "We are receiving unconfirmed reports of multiple, coordinated raids on properties allegedly linked to reputed crime boss, Dominic Romano." Avery's blood ran cold. The screen cut to grainy, black and white footage. It was from a security camera, dated 8 years prior. She saw Dominic. He was younger, his hair shorter, but his presence was unmistakable. He was standing in a parking garage, speaking to another man. They argued. Dominic did not shout. He was cold, calm. Then he pulled a gun from his waistband and shot the man twice in the chest. He did not look away. He did not run. He simply straightened his jacket and walked out of the frame. This shocking video, leaked to Channel 4 News just hours ago, allegedly shows Romano executing a rival enforcer. The reporter's voice narrated, "Police Commissioner Davis has issued a statement vowing to use this new evidence to, quote, bring down the Romano organization once and for all. the screen filled with images of police cars, of battering rams, of federal agents carrying boxes out of warehouses Avery didn't recognize. They were raiding his operations. They were tearing his world apart. Avery's hand flew to her mouth. Giordano hadn't just attacked Dominic in the streets, he had attacked his reputation. He was trying to turn the public, and the police, against him. She stared at the phone. It did not ring. Dominic had gone dark. The next 48 hours were the longest of her life. The guards at the safe house were tense. Their radios crackled with short, coded messages she couldn't understand. She asked them what was happening, but they just shook their heads. "The boss is handling it, ma'am." Was he arrested? Was he in hiding? Was he dead in a ditch? The not knowing was a physical sickness, a constant, low-grade nausea. On the third night of his silence, the storm hit. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the wind howled through the dense pine trees, a low, mournful sound. At 9:10, the power cut out. The house was plunged into an absolute, terrifying darkness. The hum of Lila's machine went silent, replaced by the high-pitched, frantic beep of its battery backup. "Avery?" Lila's voice was a thin, terrified thread from the next room. "It's okay, monkey," Avery said, her voice shaking. "It's just the storm." But she knew it wasn't just the storm. She heard a sound from the floor below, a faint metallic scrape. The guards were outside. They should not be inside. Avery grabbed Lila's hand. "Get up! Now! What's happening?" "We're going to play a game," Avery said, her voice a strained whisper. "A hiding game." She pulled her sister from the bed, grabbing a thick blanket. She half dragged, half carried her to the basement, a vast, unfinished space that smelled of concrete and cold earth. In the far corner, behind a dusty water heater, was a small, 3-foot-high door, a crawl space. "Get in," Avery ordered. "No, Aves, it's dark." "Get in," Avery hissed, her fear making her sharp. "And do not make a sound, not until I come for you. Do you understand me, Lila? No matter what you hear, you stay silent." Lila, tears streaming down her face, nodded and scrambled into the darkness. Avery wrapped the blanket around her and pushed the small door shut, leaving it open just a crack. She ran back upstairs, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. She went to the kitchen. Her hands fumbled in the dark, searching the knife block. Her fingers closed around the largest, heaviest chef's knife. She didn't hide. She wouldn't be cornered. She stood in the center of the dark living room, the knife held low, her body trembling so violently she thought her teeth would chatter. She listened. The front door opened with a soft, grinding sound. They had cut the power. They had bypassed the security. Her guards were gone. They were dead. She heard 2 men. They were whispering. "Find the girl," one of them said. "Giordano wants her alive. The kid, he doesn't care about—" They split up. She heard one go toward the bedrooms, the other, a large shadow against the windows, moved toward the kitchen, toward her. Avery pressed herself flat against the wall, behind a structural pillar. Her heart was a trapped bird, beating itself to death against her ribs. The man stepped into the living room. He was a silhouette, but she could smell the wet wool of his coat. He was using his phone as a flashlight, the weak beam cutting through the darkness. "Pretty, pretty," he whispered. The beam landing on a framed photo of her and Lila that she hadn't known Dominic possessed. "Where are you? Little girl!" He stepped past her pillar. Avery screamed. It was not a cry of fear. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. She lunged, bringing the knife up in a wide, desperate arc. She connected. The blade sank into his shoulder, a sickening, wet thud. The man bellowed, a sound of pained surprise, and dropped his phone. He backhanded her, a brutal, open-palmed strike that sent her spinning to the floor. The knife clattered out of her grip. She scrambled, desperate Mo, as the man clutched his shoulder, blood pouring between his fingers. "Bitch!" he roared. "You cut me!" The second man ran in from the hallway. "I found the kid's room. She's not here." "She's here," the first man growled, advancing on Avery, who was crab-walking backward. "Forget life. I'm killing this one." The second man raised his gun, pointing it directly at her. "Stay still." Avery froze, her chest heaving, her cheeks stinging, the metallic taste of her own blood in her mouth. This was it. She looked at the man with the gun, at the dark, empty hole of the barrel. She thought of Lila, hiding in the dark. The window behind the men exploded. It was not a gunshot. It was a body. Dominic, soaking wet and dressed in solid black, crashed through the plate glass window in a shower of rain and broken glass. He was on the second man before the man could even turn. A dark, lethal storm. It was not a fight, it was an execution. Avery saw a glint of steel. Dominic's arm moved, once, twice, 3 times, in short, brutal, practiced motions. The man with the gun gurgled, a terrible, wet sound, and collapsed. The first man, the one she had stabbed, stared in disbelief, his hand falling from his wounded shoulder. He turned to run. Dominic moved like a panther, tackling him from behind. They hit the floor hard. Avery heard a bone snap. The man screamed. Dominic rose to his knees, his hand on the man's throat, pressing him into the carpet. "Who sent you?" Dominic's voice was not human. It was a low, terrifying growl. "Go to hell!" The man choked, spitting blood. "Who sent you?" Giordano. He knew about this place. Marco told him. Dominic's face was a mask of cold, white fury. He ended it, quickly, silently. The entire thing had taken less than 10 seconds. The room was silent, save for the howling wind and the rain pouring in through the shattered window. Dominic stayed on his knees for a moment, his chest heaving, his head bowed. Then slowly, he stood up. He was cut. Glass shards embedded in his jacket, blood dripping from his forearm. He turned to look at Avery. She was still on the floor, huddled against the wall, her eyes wide, her entire body shaking. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his eyes scanning her face, her split lip, the mark on her cheek. His gaze was raw, tortured. "Avery," he whispered. The sound of his voice, the safety of it, shattered her. She fell forward, collapsing into his arms, her hands grabbing his jacket, her face burying in his neck. She sobbed. Great, heaving, animal sounds of pure, primal terror. He held her, his arms like steel bands, crushing her to him. He rocked her gently, his hands stroking her soaking wet hair, his lips pressing into her temple. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick. "I'm so sorry." "I let my guard down." He pulled back, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I thought this place was safe," he said, his voice cold, flat, all the emotion gone, replaced by a terrifying, hollow certainty. "I let my guard down. I got sloppy. I let him get to you." "Lila," Avery choked out. "Lila, she's in the basement." She stumbled to her feet, Dominic at her side, and ran to the crawl space. "Lila, monkey, it's me. It's over. You can come out." The small door opened, and Lila crawled out, her face pale, but her eyes dry. She'd been brave. She had been silent. She looked at Avery. Then she looked at the blood on Dominic's arm. Then she looked at the 2 bodies in the living room. Dominic stepped in front of Avery, shielding Lila from the view. "Vinny is outside," Dominic said, his voice soft for the girl. "He's going to take you both to a new room. Go with him. I have to clean this up." Vinny appeared in the doorway, his gun drawn. He looked at the scene, his face grim, and nodded at Dominic. He wrapped a blanket around Lila and led her upstairs. Avery stayed. She looked at Dominic, at the rain and blood dripping onto the priceless rug. "He knew," Dominic said, his voice dead. "Giordano knew about this place, which means Marco broke, which means he knows everything. What are we going to do?" Avery asked, her voice a whisper. Dominic walked to the broken window. He stared out at the storm, at the dark, thrashing trees. "I'm going to end it," he said. "Not raids, not squeezing his ports. I am going to his compound, and I am going to put a bullet in his head, tonight. Dominic, no. He's expecting you. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," he said, turning to look at her, a strange, cold smile on his face. "It's always a trap, but it's a trap I built." He walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the dead. He came to her an hour later. She was in a new room, a smaller one, in a different wing of the house. She had showered, but she couldn't get the smell of the wet wool coat off her, or the sight of the man's eyes as Dominic killed him. He was clean. He had changed into fresh black clothes. He wore body armor under his shirt, a heavy, dark vest that made him look broader, more menacing. He had a gun holstered at his hip. He stood in the doorway, watching her. The moonlight, now that the storm had passed, was streaming in, casting silver bars across the floor. He didn't speak. He just walked to her. He unclipped the holster and set it on the nightstand. He sat on the bed and pulled off his boots. He unzipped the vest and let it fall to the floor, and he was just in a black shirt and slacks. He was just Dominic. He lay down on the bed and held out his arm. Avery went to him, curling into his side, her head on his chest. She could feel the steady, slow thump of his heart. It was the calmest sound in the world. He held her, his hand stroking her hair. There were no words. There was nothing to say. The time for talking, for shouting, for apologies was over. He shifted, his hand moving to her chin, tilting her face up to his. He looked into her eyes, and she saw everything there, the guilt, the rage, the love, the fear. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, fiery kiss of the alley. It was not the passionate, claiming kiss of the estate. It was slow. It was tender. It was a goodbye. It was a kiss of excruciating softness, a quiet promise in a world that was screaming. His lips moved over hers with a reverence that made her want to weep. They made love beneath the moonlight. There was no sound but their breathing, the soft slide of skin on skin. Every touch was a promise. Every look was a memory, a desperate attempt to memorize the curve of her hip, the line of his jaw, the feel of his hand in her hair. It was a silent, agonizing, beautiful farewell. It was the most tender, most heartbreaking thing she had ever experienced. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the silver light making him look like a statue carved from marble. "Avery," he said, his voice quiet in the darkness. "Don't," she whispered, her voice thick. "Don't say it." "If I don't come back," he said, his voice firm, ignoring her pleas. "Vinny knows. In my desk, at the estate, there's an envelope. It has your name on it. I don't care about the envelope, Dominic." "You will," he said. "It changes everything. It's the truth, about your father." Avery went still. "What truth?" "The truth that matters," he said. He sat up, swinging his legs off the bed. He began to put his armor back on, the zipping of the vest, the clicking of the holster, the loading of a magazine. Each sound was a nail in her coffin. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. "Please," she begged, the word tearing from her throat. "Don't go. Please, we can run. You, me, Lila. We can go to Texas. We can go anywhere. Just don't go. Don't leave me." He finished arming himself. He was a soldier again, a killer. He turned to her, and his face was cold, but his eyes were breaking her heart. He walked to her, knelt in front of her, and took her hand. He kissed her palm. He looked up, and his gaze was so intense, so raw, she couldn't breathe. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a soft, chaste, agonizingly final press of his lips. "I was never alive," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "Until I met you." He stood up. He walked to the door. "Dominic!" she cried. He paused in the doorway, a tall, black shadow against the light of the hall. He looked back at her. One last time, and then he was gone. The city of Port Elmsworth held its breath. Then, at 3:17 in the morning, it exploded. Dominic Romano did not just declare war, he unleashed a symphony of destruction. It was not a chaotic brawl, it was a surgical dissection. The first explosion was at the port. Vinny's team, using pre-planted charges, turned Giordano's main shipping warehouse into a column of fire that lit up the night sky, visible from Avery's window in the woods, 100 miles away. She saw the faint orange glow on the horizon and sank to her knees, her hands clasped in prayer. The second and third hits were simultaneous. Two of Giordano's primary distribution hubs, disguised as a laundry service and a frozen fish market, were hit by coordinated ambush teams. There was gunfire, precise and controlled, aimed at vehicles, at infrastructure. It was designed to cripple, not just to kill. While Giordano's forces scrambled, their communications jammed, their assets burning, Dominic moved. He was not with his men. He was alone. He drove his black car, the one that looked like a panther, through the back alleys of the industrial district, a ghost moving through the chaos he had orchestrated. He was heading for the old train depot, a rusting skeleton of iron and broken glass that Giordano used as his personal fortress, his meeting place. He knew Giordano would be there. He knew because Marco, his tortured lieutenant, had given Giordano the information Dominic wanted him to have, that Dominic's primary safe house was the depot itself. It was the trap within the trap. Giordano was not there to hide. He was there to wait, to ambush the man he thought was running scared. Dominic parked 3 blocks away and moved on foot, slipping through the shadows, the distant sounds of sirens and gunfire providing the soundtrack to his hunt. He bypassed the front, where Giordano's men were waiting. He entered from the south, through a collapsed maintenance tunnel he had known about since he was a boy, a place where he and his brother used to hide from the world. He moved silently, a shadow among shadows. He could hear them. 4 men, playing cards under a single, bare bulb, waiting for a target who would never arrive the way they expected. He found Giordano on the upper catwalk, a long, metal walkway that overlooked the cavernous, empty depot floor. He was smoking a cigar, staring out a broken window at the city, at the fires that were currently consuming his empire. He was alone, arrogant, even in the end. Dominic stepped out of the stairwell, his footsteps echoing in the vast, metal space. Giordano turned. He was not surprised. He smiled, a thin, reptilian gesture. "Dominic, I was wondering when you'd show your face. You're too late, your man, Marco, sang like a bird. He gave me everything, your accounts, your safe houses. He even gave me the girl." "He gave you what I told him to," Dominic said, his voice calm, an icy contrast to the burning city. "He stopped 20 feet away. He was a good soldier." Giordano's smile wavered. He took a nervous puff of his cigar. "Lies. You're bleeding. My men at the woods, they reported in. They took care of her." "Did they?" Dominic asked. He took a slow, deliberate step closer. "My operations are being raided, my assets seized. You did that. The video, clever. You turned the police on me. You think you've won." "I have," Giordano sneered, trying to regain his confidence. "I'll be running in this city by dawn. And the girl, she was the real prize. You know, I had a buyer, a rival group in Chicago. They pay a high price for a woman who belongs to a man like you. Leverage." He flicked his cigar ash onto the floor below. "Selling her was going to be the most satisfying part of all. Knowing you were in a cell. Knowing she was somewhere else. Being used." The confession hung in the cold, damp air. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Dominic closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He saw Avery's face, her terror in the hallway, her desperation in the apartment, her soft, sleeping form in his bed. When he opened his eyes, they were dead. "You should have just come for me," Dominic said, his voice a whisper. He raised his gun. Giordano, in a pathetic, desperate lurch, fumbled for his own. He was too slow. He was always too slow. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. It was not a battle. It was a point-blank execution. Giordano crumpled to the catwalk, his cigar rolling out of his hand, showering sparks onto the concrete below. Dominic walked over. He stood above the man who had torn his life apart, who had threatened the only thing he had ever truly cared about. He leaned down, his voice a low, lethal promise. That was for her. He did not wait to see the man die. He turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows, the king returning to his burning, broken and finally conquered city. Avery was sitting on the floor of the safe house, her back against the wall. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, she had not slept. She was watching the door. At 6:17, she heard the car, a low, familiar rumble. She flew to the door, her heart in her throat. She fumbled with the locks, her hands shaking so badly she could barely function. The door swung open. He was there. He was standing. He was alive. He was covered in mud, his face bruised, his left arm held stiffly at his side. His black shirt was soaked, a dark, viscous stain spreading from his shoulder down his ribs. He was bleeding. A lot. "Dominic," she breathed, the word a prayer, a sob. He looked at her. The cold, dead look from the depot was gone. His eyes were just tired. He gave her a small, pained smile. "A broke waitress, huh?" he whispered, and then he collapsed. She caught him, his full weight falling on her, driving them both to their knees in the doorway. "Help!" she screamed. "Vinny, help me!" Vinny and 2 other guards were there in a second, lifting Dominic, carrying him inside. "It's fine." Dominic grunted, his face pale, his teeth gritted. He got lucky. A knife. In the tunnel, they laid him on the massive kitchen table. "Get the medical kit," Vinny barked at one of the men. "Ma'am, you need to step back." "No," Avery said, her voice clear, firm. "I'm not going anywhere." She grabbed a pair of scissors from the kit. "Hold him." She cut the shirt away. The wound was deep, a vicious, gaping slash along his collarbone and into his shoulder. It was bleeding sluggishly, but it was horrifying. "I need warm water, clean clothes, and that bottle," she said, pointing to the antiseptic. She worked. Her hands, which had been shaking, were now steady. All the fear, all the terror, vanished, replaced by a singular, sharp focus. This man, who had burned the world for her, was bleeding on a table, and she was the only one who could fix him. She washed the blood away, gently, tearfully. She cleaned the grime, her touch so soft it was barely there. He winced, hissing through his teeth, but he did not move. He just watched her. His eyes, dark with pain and exhaustion, never left her face. She was crying. Silent tears streaming down her face, dripping onto his skin, mingling with the blood and the water. She was washing away the night, the violence, the man he had to be, revealing the man who was hers. When the wound was clean, she stitched it. Her movements were clumsy, but she was careful. Vinny had to hold Dominic's other shoulder down. When she was done, she wrapped his shoulder and chest in thick, white bandages. She was covered in his blood. Her hands, her shirt, her face. He lifted his good hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Avery," he whispered. "Shh," she said, her voice breaking. "Just rest. Please, just rest." She found the envelope 2 days later. Dominic was sleeping, a deep, healing sleep in the master bed. Vinny, seeing that the war was truly over, had driven back to the estate to secure it. He returned with a single, cream-colored envelope. Her name was on the front, in Dominic's sharp, black handwriting. She sat in the living room, the sun streaming in, and opened it. It was not a letter. It was a stack of papers, a confession notarized, dated 2 years prior. It was from a man she didn't know. He confessed to being Giordano's bookkeeper, and he confessed to framing her father. Her father, he wrote, had been a gambler. He had a debt. But Giordano saw a different kind of value in him. He tried to force him to become an informant. Her father, for all his flaws, for all his failures, had refused. He would not betray his city. He would not betray the Romano family, who had, generations ago, helped his own. So, Giordano had framed him. He manufactured evidence, made it look like her father was singing, and then used that debt to seize his assets, to ruin him, to put the squeeze on him until he broke. He died before he could. Her father was not a traitor. He was just a man with a gambling problem who, in the one moment that mattered, had tried to do the right thing. Avery read the document twice, her hands shaking, the shame she had carried, the quiet, secret belief that she was the daughter of a rat, evaporated. She put her head in her hands and sobbed. It was not the cry of terror from the attack. It was not the cry of grief for Dominic. It was a cry of pure, unburdened relief. It was the sound of her past, her prison, crumbling to dust. She felt his hand on her shoulder. She looked up. Dominic was standing there, his bandaged arm in a sling, his face pale, but his eyes clear. "You knew," she whispered, clutching the papers. "You knew he was innocent." "I knew," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "But everyone said you said—" "I let them believe the lie," Dominic said, sitting beside her, his good arm pulling her close. "It was safer for you. If Giordano thought I was just cleaning up a traitor's debt, it was business. If he knew I was protecting the daughter of the man he framed, the man who defied him would have been a vendetta from the start." He held her as she cried into his shirt. "I am so sorry, Avery, for what he put you through, for what I put you through. He wasn't a bad man," she choked out. "No," Dominic said, his voice soft. "He wasn't. He was just a man. And I made sure his name was clear." He held her, and for the first time since her father's death, Avery felt truly safe. Weeks later, the city was healing. The papers called it the Giordano takedown, attributing the arrests and the collapse of the cartel to the police raids, fueled by the anonymous video. Dominic Romano's name was mentioned only as a rival, a man who had also been targeted. The truth, the real war, remained in the shadows, where it belonged. Lila was sitting on a bench, a real bench, in a real park, breathing real air. She held an acceptance letter in her hand, a world-renowned treatment center in Switzerland. They were not just offering to treat her, they were offering to cure her. "Avs," she breathed, her eyes wide. "It says it's all paid for, anonymously, by some Romano family children's charity?" Avery smiled, and squeezing her sister's hand. "Guess there are still a few good men in the world." That night, Avery stood on the rooftop of the estate. The city lights of Port Elmsworth glowed below them, a sea of diamonds against the black velvet of the night. It was quiet, the air cool and clean. She heard him step out onto the terrace. He was no longer in a sling. The wound had scarred, a pale white line against his skin. He came to stand beside her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. They stood in silence for a long time, just watching the city. His city, their city. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "That first night," she whispered, "at the Velvet Smoke, the $1,000 tip. You knew who I was, even then, didn't you? The daughter of the man Giordano framed. I knew," he admitted. "I had Vinny keeping an eye on your father's family, to make sure Giordano didn't come for you. I just didn't expect to see you. And the text," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "You came all that way, in 4 minutes, for a stupid text." He chuckled, a low, warm sound she had never heard before. He turned her in his arms to face him. "Still think?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I've never been kissed by a broke waitress with nothing to lose?" Avery smirked, her hands sliding up his chest to tangle around his neck. "Guess I was wrong about you." "I hope so," he said. He leaned down and he kissed her. It was not the hesitant, questioning kiss from the hotel. It was not the desperate, fiery kiss from the alley. It was not the tender, heartbreaking farewell from the safe house. It was slow. It was deep. It was unafraid. It was the kiss of a man who had nothing left to hide and a woman who had nothing left to fear. It was the kiss of 2 survivors. 2 souls who had been forged in violence and fear and had come out the other side. As the skyline of Port Elmsworth burned gold in the first light of the new dawn, it was, quite simply, a new beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Avery and Dominic. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. Your thoughts mean the world to us. Let us know what you thought of the story, your favorite parts, or what you'd love to see in the future. And finally, if you love this as much as we do, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of passion and danger. We'll see you in the next story.